Chess friends, I hope you are doing well. Today, I have the Alexander the Great chess bot on my YouTube channel. This Alexander the Great bot is just wonderful and impressive because it has an Elo rating of 3900, demonstrating elusive performance on the board. As you know, Alexander was the king of Macedonia who conquered many kingdoms one after another. I'm going to play against this Alexander, so stay tuned until the end of the video. I started the game with e4, and the king of Macedonia, Alexander the Great, played c5, deploying the Sicilian defense. Instead of considering any normal moves, I played c3. I wanted to deploy the Alapin variation to control the center. Alexander responded with b6 because he wanted to place his army chief, Parmenion, his bishop on the b7 square. In war, Alexander's army strategy was mind-blowing and spectacular. He placed the bishop on b7 to attack my pawn. My bishop advanced to d3, and we have knight to f6. Alexander is attacking my center, and I defended it with knight to d2. Alexander then played g6 on the board because he wanted to develop the bishop along this diagonal and was not interested in building a pawn center by advancing the e or d pawns. Therefore, I also played defensively with knight to e2. I wanted to defend my position and my kingdom very well so that Alexander couldn't use his strategies to attack, invade my position, and weaken my squares. This is my strategy, as my arrows here show. I can push the f-pawn forward in the future if necessary. Now d6 followed in the game, where knight to d7 could gain control over the center and make e5 possible. In response, I told Alexander he might be a great emperor, but if I were born in his time, I might have been the king of Alexander because now I can push the pawn forward to d5, locking down the center and trapping Alexander's bishop. After the bishop went to g7 and my knight moved to g3, my knight controlled the center, making f4 and f5 possible. I warned to be careful of the d5 pawn, as it could be attacked by the bishop, making c4 a consideration in the future. After castling from both sides to ensure the king's safety, we had a4 on the board to prevent any soldier invasion from the western side of Alexander's army. Then Alexander struck in the center with e6, wanting to attack. Here, many players might consider c4, but it's a completely poor move. Do you know why? Because now Alexander could ride on his favorite horse, Bucephalus, and go to the b4 square, which is a weakened square. With Alexander's sword, he would attack my bishop, and after the bishop retreated from in front of him, he would command his army to exchange pieces on the d5 square. He would then sacrifice his army general on d5 to capture my rook on a1, creating a devastating position for me. Returning to the position, we discovered that c4 was a very poor choice because the knight could go there, followed by b4, and the bishop's diagonal would open up widely. Therefore, in this position, we have the pawn capturing on e6, and after the capture, Alexander's pawn became weak. As you can see, these pawns could be attacked by my queen, and my knight would need to go to f3 and then to g5 to attack the e6 square. Of course, bishop to c4 would not be possible, as Alexander could shoot an arrow with his archer army behind his sword army. This is Alexander's strategy in war. He places his sword army in front of his generals, with archers behind them, and sends his main army generals to invade from different sides of the kingdom. This strategy allowed him to conquer over 16 territories. You can see that I am also not inferior to him because I am the god of chess, and I need to defeat this Alexander bot. Alexander is defending his position and attacking through his rooks. Much like his war tactics, the knight moved back to the b8 square, maneuvering to control the center. Remember, when there are no immediate attacking possibilities or weaknesses in your opponent's position, you should develop your pieces and maneuver your knights to better posts. The bishop's diagonal opened up, and the knight attacked the pawn, which had the potential to open up the f-file. Noticing all this, I decided to sacrifice my pawn on a5. If Alexander captures the pawn, then well done. That's exactly what Alexander did in the game. He developed his pawns and weakened my center. Then I played rook to d1, attacking the pawn and allowing my bishop to go to g5, but Alexander responded, "Hold on, Stockfish, you may be the god of chess, but I am the king of kings. I am the student of Aristotle, and he taught me to secure the center on the 5th rank so that no knights can go to these squares." The dark squared bishop held no potential there, and the light squared bishop on b3 had no value. except for one good square, a4. Alexander defended his position very well with the black pieces, as he was Aristotle's best student. After my bishop moved to d3, Alexander didn't capture it. Instead, we had c4 on the board, and after my bishop moved back, you could see how the army general's pawn dominated the c4 square. Acting with the power of a rook, the knight could also move to c6 to control the center. And we have knight to d7, Alexander can put his rook on the b8 square, which is why I played bishop to f4, attacking along the diagonal. Here, many players might consider e5 to attack the bishop, then the bishop would simply move back, attacking the pawn, and, of course, you would have created a weakness on d5, but that's the beauty of Alexander's war strategy. He has already made my knight passive, and you can see that it has no freedom to move to these squares. The knight cannot go to d5. And the light-squared bishop cannot go to d5 either. They have become very passive. This is Alexander's brilliance. He is commanding the game by making his opponent's pieces passive. My generals and their territories cannot perform to their full potential. So, let me share an inspirational quote in sudden with you. Stop letting people who do so little for you and control so much of your mind, feelings, and emotions. However, in the actual game, Alexander didn't consider e5, instead, we had knight to e5, inviting my knight for a sword fight, and I accepted. After the exchanges, the bishop retreated to e3, attacking the pawn. You can see that I masterfully created double pawns on the e file and the a file for Alexander. My knight on g3, though, has no potential and no future, so it must move back to f1, but it needs more than 3 moves, and meanwhile, Alexander can exchange rooks or improve his position. That's why I played rook to a2, as I wanted to double up my rooks on the a file for the water fight. Thus, the pawn cannot be protected by the bishop, and, a few moves later, you'll see how I captured the pawn on a5, as a4 is not possible. A few moves later, Alexander tried to exchange bishops on the c5 square. He offered me an exchange, but I declined by playing bishop to h6, seizing control over the diagonal. However, the problem for me would be that his bishop would get an open diagonal. Therefore, Alexander could play the powerful and smashing move knight to d5, opening up the rook's diagonal. If I capture the knight, then after rook takes f2, he could sacrifice the queen on the board. I would lose the queen but gain 3 minor pieces for it, and 2 pieces for his 2 rooks. Although black would have an advantage, most players would fear being down a queen. Even if white has adequate material, the center would just belong to black. I didn't want to play from that position, so I didn't consider bishop to h6 here. Instead, I played bishop to a4, attacking his bishop. The knight retreated to protect it while also opening up the rook's diagonal, giving Alexander an opportunity to improve his attacks. After some piece exchanges, rook to a5 came on the board, attacking the pawn. Alexander then tried to double up his rooks to attack my f2 pawn. You can see that we're about 30 to 35 moves into the game, but we still haven't had any major tactics. This is a high-level chess game with 100% accuracy, where Alexander hasn't allowed any weakness in his position. However, if you dare to create weaknesses by passivating your rook on f1, he could exchange bishops and win your rook on a5. You have to play very carefully and not fear your opponent, no matter how strong, whether he is Alexander the Great or a less renowned player. In this game, you can see how we ended up with double pawns on the e file. Have you ever seen a chess game like this, where 4 pawns are doubled on the e file? Beginner players might create such a structure, but this is Alexander the Great. He tried to invade by playing h5, intending to advance with h4. My knights have had no good outposts since the opening, requiring many moves to become active. So I played rook to b4, followed by rook to f2. In this position, many players might think of capturing the pawn on c4, but be careful when invading Alexander's treasure. He could exchange pawns and capture on b2, gaining access to the second rank. This is endgame strategy. You should place your rooks on the second rank if you're playing black, preventing the white king from activating in the center. Believe it or not, knight to h1 is the only move that ensures the white king's safety here. in this position. I decided not to capture the pawn. Instead, I decided to sacrifice my queen. I gave up my queen because, with my rooks as my best friends, I could still defeat Alexander the Great. Although we have equal material, there is an imbalance with the queen and rooks on the board. Here, many players might think of capturing the pawn on b2, but if Alexander does, I could play rook to a1 or rook to a7, he would then have to consider queen to b8, and rook to c7 would follow. After the knight moves, rook to e7 could secure the attack. This position would be over for him because I could push the c-pawn, and he couldn't capture it without hanging his knight. Alexander would feel suffocated, unable to invade India even after conquering most of the known world. That's the limitation of great kings like Alexander. Spiritual knowledge is more powerful than any material position, and Alexander admitted his defeat, recognizing that he lost against India without any battle. Looking back, we see that Alexander didn't capture the pawn because the rooks provided a spiritual power, enough to defeat any powerful king like Alexander. A few moves later, you'll see how the position evolved. In this position, I just needed to push the pawns, with exchanges of knights occurring. Ultimately, I needed to capture the remaining pawns, including the h-pawn. Slowly but surely, this position was winning for me, and this game with Alexander Bot was amazing and spectacular. I hope you enjoyed the game as much as I did. I promoted my h-pawn to a new queen, and finally, I checkmated Alexander the Great. Maybe he is the Alexander of losers. What did he truly gain after conquering thousands of territories and taking countless lives? That's not greatness, that's failure. Anyway, I wish you all the best. Bye bye, take care, and subscribe for more videos.